Hi, David.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Great.
Okay.
What does this do here? What's that telling me? Okay. No.
Perfect. How are you, David?
I'm actually not feeling really good. I'm under the weather. I've got a cold and cough, but
Really?
yeah. And I was shivering last night before I went to bed. So hopefully it's nothing serious.
Oh my God. I hope nothing's wrong.
No, I don't. I think it's. I was cycling on Sunday and got a chill because it was a long ride and I had to stop. The guy had a puncture, and then you get cold. So I think it's. I think it's that. I don't think it's anything COVID related. I mean, now everyone thinks as soon as you start to cough, oh my God, you got COVID.
Yes, exactly. Because now the COVID phobia, right?
Yeah. So I'm not. I don't think I have COVID, but nevertheless I don't feel very well. So we'll. I've been taking a few things this morning to get me up for this session. So
perfect. So hello everyone, and hi again, David. Today David is with us. He was formerly running head of corporate services procurement and human capital procurement at Novartis, and now he's at Lonza as the head of capex procurement. Thanks a lot for taking this time. So David, today we are going to talk about total workforce management. So to begin with what's in your view is total workforce management? What does it mean for a company to have such a strategy, and how do we reach capital in this new era?
Yeah, so there's a lot of questions in that one question.
Yeah.
Let me try and work through them one by one. So what is total workforce management? Let's try and start there, because there's been a lot of talk. At least for me, I got into this about 5 years ago, and we were talking about what it is. My understanding of it, I won't give you an Oxford English dictionary version, but my understanding of total workforce management is the following. You've got companies need to get work done. They have sort of traditional workforce are tenured employees that you hire and they work for you. Then many companies have what we call contingent workers or contractors, but companies also use other means of getting work done. We have outsourced service providers. You have consultants. More recently, we've seen the growth in the gig economy. You've got a lot of gig marketplaces out there that will offer you either more generalist or more specialist, i.e. I need a data scientist, I can go to a specialist gig market. And even some people include non-human workers, i.e. robots. I myself don't like to do that, but it's basically any way you can get work done using whatever sourcing channel to get that work done. Now, most companies have or use some or all of those sourcing channels, but very few companies have what I call on top the strategic element that ties it together. So they typically work in silos. So HR takes care of permanent recruitment. They typically don't look at the non-perm side. They don't see that as their job for whatever reason. I argue that's not the correct way of looking at it, but they don't. And the strategic workforce element is really to have a holistic view of your entire workforce and make deliberate decisions about how and why you use one channel over another. And it shouldn't be accidental. In many companies it is. I give you an example from Novartis. You can't have headcount. Therefore, hiring manager goes, okay, how do I get the work done? Let me see. Who do I know? I'll go out to a consultancy, or I know a contractor, or whatever. But they're not deliberate decisions. They're not weighing up what's the best way of getting the work done. It's just you can't have that, you can't have that, and I'll figure out a way of getting it done. So the idea of total workforce management is to put that strategic element on top to do that demand planning with the business. And then underneath it, you have all the execution channels that are going to allow you to get that worker or workers through one of those channels. And then bringing it all together, you have an element of service to the hiring manager. I'm not an expert in this space. I'm a hiring manager. I just need to get work done. I'm looking to people who understand this to guide me to the best way of getting that work done. And obviously it's got to be compliant, and I'm not a compliance expert either. So, all of that should just work. So it's a bit long-winded, but I think that's how my understanding of what I would call total workforce management.
Right. So why do you think it's critical for future of work? Why do you think it's critical or very strategic for a company to have such strategy, such talent strategy? And I have more questions, but I will come one by one.
Let's take them one by one.
Yeah.
So, I think it's important simply for, we're working today in a knowledge economy, and it's a globalized knowledge economy. And for many companies now, a competitive advantage is access to that knowledge, access to that talent. And I use an expression. When I work for a company, if I'm in this area, I want that company to have its unfair share of talent. Because if I have an unfair share, someone else has less, I have a competitive advantage, right? So having access to that is just a key strategic advantage for success or not of your company, right? Today everybody's talking about digital. You can't turn on the television, look at an article, digital. But it's not like we have hundreds of millions of digital workers out there. We don't. So they're in shortage, and yet everybody wants to go digital. So how do I make sure in my little corner of the world I'm getting access? And that's just one profile of those digital data scientists or whatever. How do I do that? Why are they going to come and work for Lonza and not for somebody else?
Right.
So whatever way I can make sure that we get access to that, that's providing an advantage to the company. And that's, for me, the underlying reason why you've got to go and do this. It's because, it's about your not just survival, but the thriving or not of your business, right? It's a raw material, right? If I don't have access to that raw material, I can shut up shop, right? I'm not going anywhere.
And actually, that raw material is probably the main core of innovation, right? So that makes a lot of sense. So
in innovation and in the past, your company was in a particular place, a physical place, and therefore you were hiring people within a radius of, depending on if we were coming to work on a donkey or a car or whatever, within a certain distance. Today, with this digital world, we have the ability, if we so choose, to extend that radius to way beyond the physical workplace, right? So if I'm a data scientist sitting on a beach in Costa Rica with a laptop, I can work for a company in Istanbul because, as long as I have an internet connection and the laptop and my brain, I can work. Now, not all companies are ready to do that because some people like to have you sitting next to them tapping on the laptop, and they don't like the idea that you're sitting on the beach in Costa Rica. But it's there. All of a sudden, you've got access to talent that you never had access before. You just couldn't because they weren't within the vicinity of your office.
And you talked about hiring managers. Is it? Do you think it's the hiring managers, but is it also not the head of business units or actually the implementing managers as well that should know about different modes of work so that they know when and how to implement or to go ahead with which one?
Yeah, that's a good question. Why not? But if you're head of engineering or head of sales or finance or procurement, is it really your job to know about the different channels that you can get your workforce from? Maybe. And if you're interested, why not? But I'm of the opinion that you should have a specialist whose job is to understand this, where talent is, in which markets are they, where can we find them, rather than Joe Blow hiring manager who's got a day job. So I think if you're looking at strategic workforce planning, you've got to feed up from the bottom from, what do we think our requirements are going to be next year, the year after, in terms of the number of people, the types of people, the skill sets we're looking for, and then discussions about onshore, offshore, nearshore, and things like that. That information has to come up from the bottom because I can't tell you what you need, right? If I'm that, hiring desk person. I can't tell you what you need, but what I can tell you is if I understand what you need, this is the advice I give you. Here are the channels that are open to you. And for your particular need, I'm going to advise you to go down this channel. And by the way, I'll execute it for you because we have all the channels set up to execute it. So your job is just really to explain your need. And then obviously you're going to have to interview people because we're hiring people in the end and decide which one or ones you like the best, which is natural. I'm not going to tell you which one is the best for you, but all the rest we can do for you. We being that talent function.
So also, even if it's for a hiring manager, or let's say maybe it could also be with HRBPs or hiring managers. I don't know which you think. That could also be another question. But so, what is the way to know which one to use and how? So, and also, what are the ways to set up such a system, or how do companies begin with, considering a total workforce management strategy?
Okay, so now again, you've got a lot of questions in there. I mean, in Novartis, we created a decision tree to answer your question of how do you know which channel to go down. So you create a decision tree, and you can do this in a couple of ways. You could automate it, and questions are asked, and then the hiring manager fills in, and then there's a decision tree which tells you it's this. My fear with the automation is, and maybe I'm cynical, but you can always game decision trees if you so choose. Right? I've seen it in other areas. I will get you to the answer that I want. I can figure out how to game it, and most smart people can. Right? So I will put in whatever I want to get to the answer that I want. That's not the idea, right? It should be neutral, i.e., I go in with an open mind, and then this decision tree will take me to what is probably the most appropriate. So my personal view on it is that you would have a human being who has that knowledge, would walk you through as a hiring manager and say, okay, decision tree, ding, 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 here's the criteria. For example, I'll give you a silly example. The project, it's a project. It has a start date and a finish date. It's going to last approximately 12 months. It requires this skill set. And after that, I don't really see a need to have that skill set in my workforce. So it's a very definite project. So I'm probably not going to tell you, oh, go out and hire an FTE, because after 12 months, what are you going to do? Fire the person? No, that wouldn't be an appropriate thing to do. So, okay, now it's a defined period. What are the choices? We could go to a staffing company and see if they have a person of, with that skill set. We could go to a freelancer platform. We could even ask a consultancy, although probably that's going to be very expensive, but it is an option. So here's a few options, right? Then together we'll agree this is probably the most appropriate one. That's very, very simply how I think it would work. So you have this decision tree with certain criteria. But in the end, a lot of it's common sense. I think one of the big things we need to do is take away, and this is a discussion with finance, this headcount or not headcount question, because that creates all kinds of problems and it drives the wrong decisions.
Okay.
And I've seen this in all corporations, right? Because oh, you can't have headcount. Okay, right. So what am I going to do? I end up with a solution that's very expensive just to say that that person is not on the books. It's off balance sheet, so to speak. And for me, companies need to have a mind shift change to, it's not about headcount or not headcount. It's about cost, right? I need to get the work done. Whether it's a headcount or not shouldn't matter. It should be, what does it cost to get it? First of all, do I get the right person, the right quality? But after that, what's the cost of it? Whether it's on the books or not as a headcount, who cares? I mean, if I'm paying more to not have it on the books, surely the most important ratio is the profit and loss at the end, not how many people you have relative to your sales. Because, in the financial analysts will say, oh, there's 100,000 people and this much sales, therefore, this number, and they get a bit obsessed with that. No, it's profit and loss. So if I'm paying twice as much to have them not on the books, is that smart business? I don't think so, right?
Okay, and do you think it's very straightforward for certain, to get a job done, like like, because the cost, how will you know if it has been innovative enough, or if you have, if you have brought in the best know-how as well? Like, if we only optimize cost, do you think that will bring the right solution? Or
No,
are there?
I'm not suggesting cost is the number one driver, and I know I'm a procurement guy, so we would often be accused of being focused on cost, and that's a fair criticism. My personally, anybody that knows me knows that's not how I think. For me, the most important criteria in this space is the talent and the quality of the talent. It outweighs everything else, because if I bring you a low-cost worker who's pretty much rubbish, well, I can say, great, yeah, it's cheap, but they don't know how to do the job, or they, it takes them twice as long to do it, or it's poor quality work. All that's irrelevant, right? That the cost is absolutely of no interest to people. And in my experience, when you're hiring people, it doesn't matter how, perm or non-perm. There's a couple of things that all hiring managers want. They want the best talent they can find, whatever that may be. They want it yesterday, i.e. really, really quickly. And they want it done in a manner where it's painless, or as painless to them personally as possible. Those three criteria are the big criteria. You notice we haven't talked cost in there.
Yeah.
That's okay, it's got to be, obviously, but that's not to the forefront of their mind, the hiring manager. Now, if it's a permanent hire, HR will say, yeah, okay, it's this grade, and therefore the salary is this to this. And then maybe procurement will say, okay, we've got a rate card here for your non-perms, and you must all that. But the hiring manager doesn't really care so much about that.
Yes. Okay. And so coming back to the previous question, when the latter part. So how should a company start with, how should they begin to implement a total workforce management strategy? Like, let's say a person from HR or procurement, maybe a C-level, they are interested in this. Like, what should be their initial steps?
So, and this is speaking from the battle scars that I've accumulated over time, and how maybe some of the mistakes that I or the companies I've worked in have made. I think if you want to do this, you've got to get senior level buy-in to it. You've got to get a sponsor in the C-suite that says, I get this. I can see the strategic value of doing this. And we're going to set up a project team that's going to, this is going to be a priority for us, right? That is going to be your, I think, one of the fundamental things you've got to get in place. And it's probably, you could probably say the same with any strategic initiative, right? If you don't have the right sponsorship, the right people, it's going to be hard, right?
Yes, and I agree with this particularly because it's you need to experiment in this area, right? So it's not all black and white, or do you think it's very straightforward?
Well, it's not. No, it's not straightforward at all. But the idea, a little bit like, oh, let's do a pilot. The danger there is that you go in half-heartedly, and if it didn't work right the first time, oh, you see, we tried it, was no good, like just abandon it, right? That's I've seen that happen too, and that's a shame when that happens.
Right.
You have got to go into this with the idea that this is a journey, as people like to say. It's not a quick win, right? This is not going to just overnight bang and all of a sudden the world is different. It's not like that. It's a gradual thing, because there's a huge element of a cultural change in this, right? And a cultural change takes time. It takes years in large organizations. So you've got to be in it for the long run. And you've got to walk in with your eyes open, i.e. the senior executives. There will be some things that you might see, in the immediate or quicker, but this is really a mind shift that we have to take through the organization. So a pilot is the antithesis of that long-term change. It's very much kind of like, oh, let's try it for 6 months, and if it works, great, and if it doesn't, we'll abandon it. So more often than not, it's abandoned because it doesn't, out the box, it doesn't work smoothly all the time straight away. Because you've got to get people who are used to hiring people in one or two different ways, who maybe not have thought of all of this, who certainly have never done strategic workforce planning. They've got to start to think differently. And, people are not wired for change. So it takes time. Now, if you want to go, so that's the first thing, that sponsorship is really, really important. Now, in the more practical things that you can do, and this is slightly easier, what do I have today? How do I hire people today? So let's start with the permanent workforce. Do we have our own recruiters? We do it ourselves. Some companies will use recruitment process outsourcing, an RPO, or have some combination. So that's one channel. Do I use a staffing company or multiple staffing companies? Do I have an MSP? Yes or no? Do I have a VMS system? Yes or no? Okay, that. Am I using gig platforms? Do I want to look at that? Do I want to bring in some gig platforms? What consultancy? What outsourcing? It's do an inventory of all of that and make sure that all of those channels are set up and running properly, right? That's the execution arm of it. So they're the building blocks. And then what's missing once you've got all of that in is tying them together, because they're sort of today run independently in silos. And bringing that piece in, that the glue that brings them together into the holistic piece, so that you're making a deliberate decision to go down one route or another route. That's what you got to put in. And then the final piece on top, the cherry of the cake, is the strategic workforce planning element. So that's how I think organizations can go about this. Once you start with the buy-in. I'm selling the idea, and I had to do that in Novartis. It took me 3 years to do it, by the way. And then as I left the company, they said yes.
I can see the battle scars.
Yeah, and one of the things, because in that period of trying to sell it, and because I'm impatient by nature, I said, okay, I can see that they're not against the idea, but it's not the right time because talent acquisition was, having some problems. And they said, look, we need to fix that before we can start to move on to this. Okay. I said, all right, I'm going to continue, and I'm going to start to build some of this myself. I'm just going to roll it out, which, so I brought in some gig stuff. I set up a talent community and things like that. But building the tools is the easy bit, because I can control that and I can get it in. It's getting people to use them is the hard bit, right? So I've got everything ready. It's like I've built the house, I've put the electricity, the plumbing, everything's ready. The house is there, but no one's living in the house. It's a nice house, but no one wants to live in it. So, that's a shame. Hence why the sponsorship that I talked at the top is so important, because I can design and build the house, but who's going to use it? And that's where I saw that we started to the challenges was really there, and that's where you've got to get that a little bit of top-down push. This is important. We're going to set targets for every business unit that you're going to use. These alternative channels. You're going to have to do strategic workforce planning. There's got to be a little top-down push as well. It can't only come from bottom up, right?
So so that actually brings us to the next question. Thanks a lot for talking about this. So when you say top to bottom push, is it mostly based on our discussion, is it mostly on the hiring managers, or is it also on business units? Like, how do you get them to use, or are there also other alternative ways?
So for me, first of all, this is a business initiative, so it's not an HR initiative. Right?
Okay.
It's got to be a business initiative. I think that's really important. Unfortunately, and if there are any HR people listening to this, I apologize up front, but HR is very much a conservative, traditional function, in my opinion, stuck in the 20th century. And I'm very much generalizing. They're not all, but a lot of them are. They are not strategic. They are not going to drive something like this. So it's got to be, the ownership has got to be with the business. and HR will be a part of it because they just as procurement will and other functions, finance, whatever. But they're not the drivers. They don't typically come with this idea. I mean, in Novartis, it was us in procurement pushing HR, not the other way around. Right? And I'm going, why should I own this, i.e. procurement? Because exaggerating, I would say, I'll get you the cheapest worker. You should be the one saying, no, we want the best worker. So who owns talent? It shouldn't be procurement, because we're not incentivized to. I don't think like that myself, and neither did my team. But exaggeratingly, typically procurement will look at the financials, not at the talent aspect of it. So the ownership of it shouldn't really be in procurement, although in many companies it is, because HR just wash their hands of it. So I think that the business needs to take ownership of that and drive it through their own business units, and of course, driving through a business unit, eventually it gets to an individual hiring manager, sure, but it should come from the leadership at the top and to the leadership in each business unit, each function, and then of course, you have to educate people to this new way of working and the different channels and all that stuff, and that has to be done at a lower level with individuals, right? So I think that's how I would position that.
Okay. And in terms of from workforce planning to task force planning, or that kind of shift, how important do you think it is? We are coming towards the end, but we can expand a bit because we have some idle time. But if we can put a light on this before we end the session, like what does it mean to shift from workforce to task force planning, or how critical it is to break jobs into tasks and assign them to different modes of work? Because we talked about this with you a little bit, and also not only for gig work but also for internal mobility and other aspects. What do you think about that in terms of workforce planning?
Yeah, I mean, look, today to jump from where we are into breaking it down into individual tasks, I think that's a big ask. I really do. I mean, to move from the current way of working in most organizations already into the idea of total talent management is already a giant leap, right? For most companies, it's the reason why not that many have done it, right? They're still stuck and wed to their old ways. So to get to the task level, maybe in certain areas, in the IT area, that's possible, and there are platforms out there where you can go and have tasks done. But in my experience, there's very, very few organizations and very, very few people who are able to break things down into tasks. And I'll draw a parallel, for example, with consultancy, right? One of the biggest challenges for people in consultancy or in many areas is writing a statement of work.
Right.
When you hire a consultant or hire any professional service for that matter. It's either not done at all or it's done badly. And I see now that in Lonza, in the engineering services, you see it in consulting, you see it in so many areas, right? Because people are either unable, they just don't have the ability to break something down into, a set of deliverables, right? This is what I want. This is the outcome. Here are the deliverables. So to get to a task level, you need to be able to do that. And I just don't see people, or very, very few people, able to do that. They either have the competence or the time or the inclination to do it. That's my own personal experience. So.
Okay. And I think that will change as thinking shifts more from roles to skills. Do you think that might change in the near future?
I don't see that changing quickly. Already, if we can, just get people to think about getting work done in different ways, that would be the first step. But like I said, to jump down into, breaking down to tasks, yeah, it may be some areas where that's possible, and maybe that already happens today. I don't know. But
Okay.
I just find that right now, I don't know how realistic it is. I mean, I don't know your experience, Alp, or if you've seen companies being able to do that, but in my, I'd say 30 years experience,
I mean,
I haven't seen that. But
we talked about this, but I am positive on Philips' case. I think there is a lot of experimentation that needs to be done. So in terms of pilot, what I see pilot is maybe, focusing on a particular segment, and it could be digital or IT, by the way.
Yeah.
Because I think it's available for many modes of work, and agility also stemmed from there. It's for a reason. The disruption comes from there. And it's the area where the highest level of skills turnover or new skills are being developed. So I think it's going to be used more. But I have seen. I mean, I looked all around the world literally, and I see a few best cases, and I think they need to be assembled. Like Philips case or some cases in US, they need to be assembled so that you can build a certain structure to implement for a company.
I mean, I think in the IT, that's the one area where I think it could be possible because it lends itself to that, right? You can have somebody write a piece of code for a very specific area, and then it's about how do you knit it all together. I mean, if you think about aviation, take Airbus, right? They have a wing made in Germany, an engine made in UK. You've got a part of the body made in France, and then they ship it to one place and they glue it together like Lego pieces, right? So that's a model that's out there in some areas, but it's not widespread in the human area, right? Of people doing work, in manufacturing, because you've got complex supply chains pieces coming from India, from China, assembled in Germany, then shipped to somewhere else to be sold. That exists for many, many years. But breaking down work that's done by humans into little bitty pieces, that's less common, right? I recall, when I go back many years to university studying Taylorism or scientific management, and then it was about breaking down tasks into repeatable tasks, and that's what they do on manufacturing lines, and common in manufacturing. In services, a lot less so. And the one company that I know that's done it, and I know this because I was in there, is McDonald's. I worked in McDonald's in the Champs-Élysées, believe it or not, after my graduation, making French fries, a business degree in making French fries. But it was so intense because they had broken down each task into a repeatable part, and there was no waste. So the person was working whatever time you're working for. There was no downtime, right? It was unbelievable. But it's the only area I've ever seen that scientific management applied to people working outside of a manufacturing environment. So they did it. They were very, very, very good at it in McDonald's, but I don't know how many others have been able.
I think it's also highly related to being able to write statement of work. I mean, to begin with. Right?
Like I said, our experience shows us that's people struggle with that.
And I think it's like a core core concept that should be taught to all managers. So
there is. I know a company actually that you probably know them too. I won't mention the name here, but who are working on a two younger guys on a startup in San Diego, who are working on a piece of software to help managers write statement of works, and then to allow them to go out and bid that out in the market, because it's very hard to bid something out accurately if you haven't written an accurate statement of work. So it's a known problem. Anybody that's in this space will tell you this is a difficulty, but the solutions are not so numerous, from what I can see.
And so we are a bit over time, so thanks for your time. My last question is, I see many of these initiatives coming from pharma. Do you think pharma will be a lead in this space, or do you think?
I have to say, it's not often pharma leaders in anything, particularly innovative. But I've read that the pharma industry seems to be one of the industries that's more advanced in this space than others. So my experience was only in Novartis, but reading about more broadly, it seems to be the case. And I guess you can explain that by, pharma is a really, really knowledge-driven industry, right? I mean, we manufacture things, but the core of the business is discovering new drugs that are going to, cure diseases. And my experience in Novartis, it was a company full of so many smart people. I mean, really, really, a concentration of people with high IQs I've rarely seen. So if you do a bell curve of smart people in the world, the really smart ones are in a minority. Hence, how do I get my unfair share of them? Because they're not as numerous as the average intelligence or the lower intelligence, but certainly most of us are in that middle of that bell curve. So maybe that's why they might be slightly ahead, because they understand that getting those people is what's going to get them ahead of the competition, and they're all fighting in a small pool to get those same people, because literally in some of these areas you can count on one or two hands the number of top class people. If you want that oncologist that understands how you're going to develop a drug to cure a particular cancer, there might be 5 or 10 of these people in the world. Right? That's more than there are pharma companies. And if I only want to have one, how am I going to get that one person? So it comes down to minuscule numbers of people. So how do you make sure you get those top brains? And maybe that's why I can only think of that.
That curve you are talking about could be an explanation of total workforce management.
Yeah, I mean, look, for me, it makes sense. If I was a CEO of a pharma company, I would be making this one of my strategic priorities, because what do I want to be good at? There's certain things I really want to be good at, but getting the best people into my company would be one of those things.
Yeah, certainly. So David, thanks a lot. We got one of the listeners, Tuna. She's also a moderator in other sessions on education. She says she just quoted HR is a function which is stuck in 20th century.
Yeah. I'm not going to, my former HR friends and colleagues in Novartis, they're not going to like me for that, but nothing personal, guys, but it's...
So we have a lot of HR listeners. But she said, love the quote. It shouldn't be, but unfortunately, and she's an ex-HR now in education.
I can draw some parallels between our two functions, between procurement and HR, because one of the things that the two functions continuously complain about is, how do we get a seat at the top table? How do we be seen as being a strategic part of the company? And I think the two functions have struggled with that. So I'm not necessarily pointing the finger at them saying they're not good and we're better. It's not the idea, but they do struggle, I think, with that.
Yeah, I have seen actually great ones, and I think strategically I agree with what you said, that they're in charge of talent. So I've seen some really good cases, but it can really depend based on the organization, I suppose.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm deliberately, it's broad stroke and I'm generalizing. And of course, if you generalize, there's always exceptions, and maybe there's quite a lot of exceptions. And it's my personal experience, having worked in different industries in different countries. That's been a sort of a theme. So it's not specific to a particular company, in my view. It just seems to be a general theme. Right?
I know, absolutely. So